The Jaden Blue one that I keep mentioning is another one we got to circle back to, Sean, where like the Cowboys for the last several years now have tried to show that they don't think running back particularly matters. The other thing they've shown is that all of their evaluations are right, or they think that, right? They think all their draft evaluations are right. They're going to keep their guy. They're going to keep like a Rico Dowdle. They're going to keep a Jalen Tolbert around and give him a prominent job and opportunity. They go out and trade picks for players that are not worth those picks. They go out and trade a 4th-round pick for Jonathan Mingo because they obviously thought that Mingo was worth the 2nd-round pick he got multiple years ago. But things have happened since then, right? But they don't care about the things that have happened. They trade a 4th-round pick for Trey Lance. They're willing to pay for what they thought a guy was in the draft, even if that guy has been poor at the NFL level. I saw that 5th-round pick for Jaden Blue, whose profile, you wrote it up, he probably doesn't have the profile to actually take on all of the potentially available work in Dallas. But his profile is still very intriguing. You were just talking to me before the show that he ran a really good 40 time at the combine, but still felt like he didn't run as well as he could have. And despite running a 4.3 something, went out at his pro day and ran again, which guys don't do. But he was so confident he could do even better. And you said some people had him at a 4.2 at that point, or 4.25.
I mean, and I think so. He ran a high 4.3 at the combine, and we are so trained to take that number that some of the other stuff that's now available that maybe wasn't always in the past. Now, the 10-yard splits people have been talking about for a while, but his was good. But then also his max speed was fantastic. So you look at that and you're like, okay, there's no real question about the speed. But he's like, no, I've got to show you that I can run like Tyreek Hill numbers. And he goes out in his pro day and does that. And, we talk about, these asterisks with the pro day times, but there's a difference, I think, if someone has already proved themselves and then they're like, no, I'm going to run again. So we both know that Jaden Blue is really fast, and then he's also really confident in just how fast he's. No question for him that he was going to come back and run in the 4.2s. And the 4.2s is speed that is just so different that it matters. You don't actually have to be that good or make that many guys miss, because if you have a hole, you were simply gone. Now, Jamal Charles was someone who was astonishing. His vision, his ability to make guys miss was out of this world. He's not going to be anything like that. But again, you think about when there's a hole, and if you do actually hit it, the long speed. Again, I don't want to make a comp to Saquon Barkley because I'm just completely apples and oranges. Barkley, a bigger back, a back who was astonishing in college, one of the greatest running back prospects ever. But we think about the value of his long runs last year. Even someone who's not that good, this is what the value of a 4.2 is. You can think back to Chris Johnson, again, a guy who was very, very good. So apples and oranges, but that ability to, I was putting together just some notes about my tiers in the FFPC's Big Gorilla, their 350 level contest this year. And we're just talking about Saquon Barkley. I have him there at 3 behind Bowers and Chase. I don't think you can go wrong picking any of those guys. Kind of looking at how many long runs you can generate overall, and then how many you score touchdowns on. And one of the interesting things is I do think that you can come back and have not the same season, but you can continue to generate long runs. But the reason I got down this whole digression is that Chris Johnson's best season, the number of long touchdown runs was insane. And again, that comes from the 4.2 speed.
And I think that's so well put as far as why he is different than the guys that he's competing with, right? So he's competing with Javonte Williams. We've talked about not being particularly thrilled about what Williams might bring to the Cowboys this year. And then Miles Sanders, they mostly have the same guys. They also, I saw a little minor hype for Phil Maffa, who was their UDFA running back they brought in, who's bigger. But despite being a much bigger back, Jaden Blue, you mentioned, is like right around 200 pounds. He's not big. He had more yards after contact per attempt last year than any year of Maffa's career. His, missed tackles forced per touch numbers are way, way better. And again, the Cowboys showed you when they took him in the 5th round, they didn't draft the running back all last draft, right? And then they went out in this draft, they waited a long time, but they decided to eventually take him. You noted before, even like with guys like DJ Giddens still on the board, it's a deep running back class. Ollie Gordon was still on the board. There's some other running backs that could be intriguing. Blue, obviously, in-state star, went to Texas. But, I mean, one of the interesting things about that is he was, behind Bijan Robinson as a freshman, behind Jonathan Brooks as a sophomore. Last year probably should have, you were saying to me, kind of gave up a lot of work to a guy who probably isn't a whole thing. The other guy that they had got hurt. The better prospect got hurt last year. And so maybe Blue should have been able to consolidate a little bit more. And yet, the work
as you were noting, he had these game logs where he would go for 150 yards from scrimmage and then wouldn't play. Go for 150 yards from scrimmage and then wouldn't play. The wouldn't play thing, and by wouldn't play, we're like, not literally, but you're talking single digit, like in some cases, low single digit touches. That obviously, those are red flags, right? But it's in some ways less of a red flag if when you did play, you were good, and the team that just drafted you is basically saying you're going to play. I mean,
right.
And not just with the draft pick, but the fact that, again, the Cowboys don't have other viable options if they want to be good this year. There's always that question of like, how committed to winning football games is a team? And the Cowboys are in that group where certainly there's plenty of lip service to the winning, but a lot of the decisions have not gone in that direction, including the whole Ezekiel Elliott thing last year. We were not huge believers in Rico Dowdle, but certainly their unwillingness to give him even just the work that he deserved last year was strange, right? I mean,
it was. But they also gave him a prominent role going into the year, despite the fact that, I mean, so you put it certainly one way that I think is fair, which is that he should have gotten more work over Ezekiel Elliott as the season was going along, and that was strange. But also going into the year, they had this player who was like 25, 26, whatever, and had played like 3 years in the NFL and basically never gotten any offensive touches. And they were serious about him having a real role in the backfield, which is interesting when you talk about the red flags in Jaden Blue's profile that, yeah, he does have, some stuff in his game log. Like, you go to the 3 college football playoff games last year, the first playoff game against Clemson, he runs 14 times, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 more catches for 31 yards, 177 total yards. The next game, a double overtime win over Arizona State, he only carries the ball 4 times for 4 yards and has 1 catch for 11 yards, only 5 touches. And then in the final, or semifinal against Ohio State, 4 carries for 16 yards. Again, only 4 in both of those next 2 games. They did have 5 catches for 59 and 2 receiving touchdowns in that game where they trailed. He's more of a receiving back in the way that they were thinking of him, at least. He had 42 catches, 6 receiving touchdowns, really impressive yards per out run and all the advanced metrics as far as his receiving profile. Didn't get consistent rushing work. In those games, they were going to another back. And to your point, that's a little bit of a red flag. It'd be more of a red flag for me on any other roster than the one that just looked at Rico Dowdle, who had no rushing background, and decided that he was worth 150 or 200 touches or whatever it was last year before the season even started. The Cowboys are this team I was saying to you before the show. My read on them is 2 things. It's one, that they really strongly trust their draft evaluations, which is why I brought up the Mingo, Lance trades, etc. And 2, it's that they think they're the smartest people in the room, but they're more like 10 years behind. Like, they believe that running backs don't matter, which was a thing that was really strongly believed like 10 years ago. But there's a lot of reason to believe in these last couple of years. You do want some dynamism at that position, but they basically phoned it in all of last year. They didn't think they needed even a player who could like vaguely matter or could be in that pocket of part of the whole running backs don't matter philosophy from the beginning was that there are so many good running backs that it's a replaceable position. It's not hard, quote unquote, to find somebody who can be good within a given system. I still think that's simplifying it probably too much, to be fair to the people who want to defend running backs. And yet the Cowboys weren't even interested in finding a player that was on that level, like in that big mass of good NFL. They didn't have an NFL caliber running back on their roster last year.
The only thing I could think as you were going through that was that now the Cowboys and Chiefs can claim to you that they have had it both ways and that they have still approached this as if it doesn't matter, but they now both have backs that can rip off 3, 4, 5, 6, 70-yard touchdowns because why not draft the fast guys, which both of those teams have successfully done. Now, again, this comes from the bias of a Chiefs fan, but throughout this whole process, it just seemed very clear that Brashard Smith was the guy that you wanted with this profile because he actually was a runner too. And you get both things. A weird decision by the Cowboys to have selected the wrong guy because that information is widely available. And yet, because they've made the choice now, I do think that both of these guys are good picks. And I say good picks. I've got Blue right around ADP in my rankings, in part because some of the guys who push him down, I have below. Some of the guys he goes ahead of, I have above. You and I took him at the 308 because he is a little more than half a round below ADP at that point. Pat and I also took him around that range when he came to that spot. I like him a lot better when he's a full half round below ADP than actually where he's going. And so it's kind of a weird dynamic where I do want exposure, and yet even where he's going, I feel uncomfortable, despite the fact that I think you have to lean into the opportunity he has.
That's interesting. I feel much more strongly that he's a clean pick at his ADP. I don't know that you want to push him ahead of into the tier that ends. Again, I can't recall if we were talking about this before the show or during the show. We eventually just decided to click record because we were having some good conversations before the show that we might as well record. And there's that second round tier. I think we were talking about it, on the show that ends in our league that we're going against each other. It ended at 207, 208, 209 range. When Scadaboo fell to 207, you have Trey Harris at 208, Jalen Milroe at 209. That's kind of a tier break at that point. After that point, to me, Blue is the next player. And I think pretty clearly the next player for me from the perspective that, number one, early opportunity tends to lead to value gain, even if the player is not particularly good in Dynasty. Just the fact that an example I would bring up is Dameon Pierce, who in his rookie year, we didn't really love him. He was going in the second round in rookie drafts. I remember after his rookie year, I was like, man, I wish I would have just taken him in the second round of some of these rookie drafts because his value had gained a lot. He was going in the dead zone the next year. I mean, to me, Jaden Blue's a guy who has way more of an opportunity to be a dead zone redraft pick in 2026 than his Dynasty ADP reflects. I think there's a real opportunity for him to be a round 6 redraft pick in 2026. Maybe not round 2, which is usually what we're looking for.
Well, one of the reasons I really like Blue is that I think he's going to rise before the season starts. And that is very helpful when you have a lot of picks like we've talked about. Right now, you and I have way more picks than we're allowed to keep on this roster. Blue seems like someone... Now, partly what's happened here is that he fell in our draft, which would indicate that our league as a whole is probably a little bit lower on him. And yet, I think we'll be able to trade him at a profit without even seeing him play football because the situation is set up for the buzz to build through the summer.
Right.
And the other thing that kind of, as we talk through this, he was the guy you and I were going to pick at 209 if we hadn't pulled the trigger on Jalen Milroe. And it was fantastic that he fell a full round to us.
Yeah, we were looking at him at that point as well, and he fell the full round. But yeah, just I was kind of trying to talk through the contextual stuff of the Cowboys. I feel strongly that they're not necessarily doing everything correctly, right? I said they're doing things 10 years, 10 years. As if we were 10 years ago, whatever. I'm struggling to say that, but we're sitting in 2015, and I joked to you before the show. It's a good example of that is Jerry Jones going on local sports talk radio still and arguing with the hosts about their opinions. Which, first of all, what owner would do that? None, right? But it's 2025, right? You have like Aaron Rodgers going on the Pat McAfee show to get a broader audience onto the things that he wants to commit his time to trying to convince people of through the media. You have the example I gave to you was Aaron Boone, the coach of the New York Yankees, does content sometimes with the Talkin' Yanks podcast, which is a very popular YouTube baseball show, which, I mean, it's 2025. That's what you would do if you're the manager of the team and you want to reach your fans. You don't go on local New York sports talk radio. You go reach the fans where they're actually watching content. Jerry Jones is still going on sports talk radio and arguing with the hosts and telling them that they're idiots and those things. So he's still living in 2015.
I think that makes me like him, though.
the boomer appeal of Jerry Jones doing his 2015 things. But the way that they are going about things, I do feel like of all the 5th round picks, this is the 5th round pick that I think is most significant. That's the point that I'm trying to come around to, that this is a team that believes their evaluations, that was never going to probably take a running back particularly high based on the way that they've been treating running backs the last few years. That as far as Jaden Blue's particular profile and whether he can get more work at the NFL level than he even got in college, which is what he kind of needs to do, that this would be the one team where I would think that that's most possible of all 32 teams because of the Rico Dowdle thing last year, because of the ways that they've operated the last couple seasons. There's no 5th round draft capital that I'm more like, oh, that means something to me. Doesn't mean I'm going to be right, as we've talked about on the show. Like, I could be wrong, but as far as contextualizing draft capital and trying to understand what the team told us, Jerry Jones and the Stephen Jones and the team in Dallas believes their evaluations, which again, they've shown with even the trades after the drafts. And they went out and they got this guy at a time when they could have got some other guys. And he's got the profile that, as you noted, he can rise in the preseason because he's going to look so much better than the other running backs in camp. He's just going to look way more explosive. He can catch passes. They're going to play him on passing downs almost immediately. You would assume they were playing Kevontae Turpin out of the backfield on passing downs last year. They drafted Deuce Vaughn way more undersized, and you know, he never really amounted to anything. They were playing Hunter Luepke on passing downs last year. They don't have Dowdle on the roster anymore, right? Like, they'll play Javonte Williams. They'll play Miles Sanders more. You know, those guys will probably play more than I would like them to play. But as the season goes along, unless he's just a bust and is just not good, there's real potential for him to earn a lot of work as the season goes on. There's potential for him to even get more touches at the NFL level than he was ever getting in college. And I think a lot of people think that's crazy, but that's literally what we just saw from Rico Dowdle last year. Not necessarily what he did in college, but what he had done the several years prior. It's also, again, Dameon Pierce, a guy who never was really a workhorse in college, and the Texans treated him like a workhorse. It wouldn't be unprecedented. It might be for a back of Blue's size, but it wouldn't be insane if he got more work at the NFL level. I don't know, Sean. I want to be in on him. I've been looking at his redraft ADP in early drafts as well. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me from a pure projections oriented standpoint, which makes me feel like a boomer because I feel like I'm doing fantasy analysis from 2005, but I feel like people just don't even put that into the analysis at this point. I mean, what if he's really good, right? I'm talking about these scenarios where he can just get a lot of work and be a 6th round pick next year and be a dead zone back. And that's maybe 40% of his profile. I think it's a strong 40% of his profile. And maybe 50% of his profile is bust, which I'm drafting him in the 3rd round of rookie drafts. I still think there's this other 10%, by the way, where he's good. The Cowboys were right in their evaluation. This is a really strong running back class for reasons you've said about a lot of the running backs you talked through in your content this last week. Like, a lot of these guys, I can't remember who you wrote it on, but you wrote it on somebody that drafters aren't putting enough emphasis on the fact that this is a loaded class that maybe push some of these guys down. And in Blue's case, he's one of them, right? Like, you gotta maybe like a little bit of a deeper running back in a class like this, where there was a lot of interesting names that made him less interesting, despite the fact that he ran a freaking 4.2, as you said. So anyway, I'm getting into this guy. I don't think drafters are playing the early, especially in Dynasty, the early opportunity proposition, and then how that will create a value moat for him, as well as the specifics of the Cowboys, how they run their organization, what it means for them to have used a 5th round pick on this running back. I feel pretty strongly that he's a solid pick where he's been going in rookie drafts.
And it's interesting because you definitely get the sort of feedback post-draft that the draft was really good for Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, that the draft was really good for Isaiah Pacheco and potentially Elijah Mitchell. I don't necessarily dispute that. At the same time, I think that the size is a little bit of a red herring of its own, where, I mean, I've written about this since, 2013, and how the size with the running backs tends to create opportunities for drafters. It doesn't mean all the smaller guys hit, but you mentioned Rashee Rice as it related to RJ Harvey in your article. Certainly we have the guys like a Chris Johnson, a Jamal Charles. Those were two of the biggest hits for me actually playing fantasy football early on there. And the opportunity certainly existed in part because the size was what people focused on as opposed to the speed. I just don't have nearly as big a problem with backs of this size as I think a lot of drafters do, in part because you get that priced in for you, right? So you don't even have to worry about that once you get to the prices you're being asked to pay for players like Blue and like Smith. If either of those guys had gone at the beginning of day 3, if they had gone in that Scatterboo Tootin range, they probably would be getting that type of buzz. Looking at this, the Cowboys didn't have a 4th round pick. The Chiefs used their 4th round pick on Jalen Royals. I mean, I think that Jalen Royals had been the best player available for like 60 selections. And so if you think that wide receiver is a more valuable reality position and you've got a guy who should have been picked multiple rounds ago, yeah, you're not going to be like, okay, let's just pick the running back here. Again, so it kind of comes back to the context that you're talking about in terms of how the teams are attacking it. And I think that there are interesting notes for a variety of other players as well, where in my write-up, I talk about Smith having a very similar thesis to Blue, and then someone like a Jarquez Hunter having a very similar thesis to Tootin. And even though, I mean, I absolutely love Tootin and feel very comfortable with him as early as like 112, 201, I've been surprised that Hunter is not generating the same type of interest. And again, the difference is that Kyren Williams is a little bit better established, is coming off of a stronger season than Travis Etienne. But with the Jaguars, you also have the fact that even though Bigsby didn't actually have a good season, he did put up some decent peripherals, in some cases strong peripherals. So that is an interesting piece to what the Jaguars were deciding to do there. But for as great a story as Kyren Williams is, and as good as he has been, and I liked him a lot last year, and the pick actually paid off fine because he scored reasonably well for fantasy, his peripherals were very poor. And I mean, the Rams have opened the door for Hunter to take over there in Los Angeles in the same way that seemingly the Jaguars want to open that door for Bashal Tootin.
Yeah, Tootin's a really interesting guy that to me is definitely in that tier above the Blue tier that I was talking about. You mentioned you'd take him as high as maybe 201-ish. In the draft that I was discussing where I took Blue and Scatterboo went 207, Tootin went one pick before him, 206. He was off the board at that point. I just got him in another rookie draft I'm doing with my buddy Jacob Sanderson, which we're excited to get him in the later second. But he's a really fun profile as well. The Jarquez Hunter conversation, bringing him in here is I think a really fun one because I did take Blue over Hunter, and that pained me. That's a really tough comparison. And I think those guys should be valued very similarly. So when you start to get into that next tier, whether Hunter goes ahead of Blue, and I think that's how you have it ranked. And I understand that Hunter's profile stronger, the Rams opportunity probably more gettable than it seems. and they seem to really like him. They said a lot of good stuff about him, and that's a team that drafts really well as well, or tends to. They're the one team that doesn't go to the combine, and they're doing some different things, and it's not exactly clear what the Rams are actually doing with some of their evaluation, using a little bit more analytics, I think, than maybe is discussed or it has been discussed. It's kind of one of those weird stories that has been kind of below the radar for some people, or maybe above the radar for others. I don't know, but in the NFL the last few years, that they don't go to the combine and do things very differently with their draft prep than some other teams. But they've had some real hits and they've done some things very effectively. At the same time, the fact that they had so much positive stuff to say about Jarquez Hunter, and that's the guy they really wanted, and all this stuff. This is another one of those situations where I'm like, I want to contextualize everything. And it does matter to me that Sean McVay says that about every single skill player they draft. Every player. He acts like it's the greatest draft pick they've ever had. They said it about Blake Corum last year. They said he was a clone of Kyren Williams. He was exactly the guy they wanted to have. And a lot of people were like, we can't take Kyren Williams in the top 3 rounds of redraft now because Blake Corum might just start over him. It's like, he's not going to start over him. If they're saying he's a clone of Kyren Williams, that's a compliment of the guy that they have in the building. But anyway, Corum barely played. And so now the thesis for Jarquez Hunter is that they don't have any plans for Corum. They've already given up on that. And all of their excitement about him a year ago doesn't matter anymore. And all their excitement about Jarquez Hunter is valid now. And I'm not saying that's not true. I actually think that's probably the most likely outcome at this moment. It's just you could play that clip back to me in 6 months and laugh at me, depending on how things go. What I would be saying that for is that's part of the range. There's always, when I was talking through Blue, one of the responses I feel like I always get when I have these conversations is, yeah, but don't you realize that most 5th-round running backs don't hit? And I'm like, yeah, but how many 5th-round running backs went to a team that just gave Rico Dowdle 250 touches last year? It's different. You can't tell me that he's just another 5th-round running back when he lands on that team. You put it into the equation. It's one of the, I said, all these guys are multifaceted earlier on. It's one of the elements that goes into the valuation. So the reason that I lean Blue over Hunter, who I would have also been very comfortable taking there had Blue gone maybe one pick before me. And I was trying to trade back into that. I had two, I mentioned earlier in this particular draft, I had a pick at 211 and 303, and I took your guy, Jalen Royals, at 303, in part mostly because you've hyped him to me to that degree. That's just, and I have Patrick Mahomes and there's a best ball league and I wanted to stack them, but I was just like, I got to get Jalen Royals on this team with my Patrick Mahomes build. But Blue and Royals, I wanted to get a running back and a receiver at this range. The other running back for me that was a target was Jarquez Hunter. And I was also trying to trade back into the 212, 301, and 302. I made offers for all of those picks. Didn't get in there. Hunter would have been, and then I mentioned the tight ends. I was also thinking about Harold Fannin and Terrence Ferguson went in that range. Those were I was trying to trade into those picks to have it was before we were on the clock, but to have more options in that range that would have included a very short list that Hunter was on. Anyway, the minor thing that had me on Blue over Hunter was this idea that I felt more confident in Blue's short-term volume thesis and thus value proposition into next year, even though he's probably not as strong of a prospect as Hunter. And it really does come down to, I'm remember the Rams saying all these positive things about Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua, but I also remember them hyping whoever that wide receiver turned tight end was, Jacob Harris. I thought Jacob Harris was going to be so good because Sean McVay was talking about how he was going to revolutionize the sport, basically. This Jacob Harris was the best thing since sliced bread. We did it with what was his name, Jacob Whittington or whatever last year, whatever that receiver was. Everyone thought he was going to be this year's Puka. He might still be good in 2025. They did it with Tutu Atwell. I mean, how many guys have they done it with? And I'm not saying again,
Tutu Atwell is going to be good this year, Ben.
Maybe he will. And
that's what
Puka.
That's what the Rams are saying.
That's what the Rams are telling you. Yeah. I don't know about that. But Puka and Kyren are hits. They exist. I'm just saying, as far as trying to find little things to really parse these differences in rookie drafts. One of the things for Hunter that I did weigh is that the Rams' positivity around him with some of the other guys that they've taken, it hasn't necessarily translated. Whatever that is that they're doing or they're not doing, it didn't make me as confident that he would even have a role in year one. He could be buried behind Blake Corum still. I mean, I think that's still very possible. He was a day 3 pick, right? He went.
So you're just basically saying that rhetoric over expected on Hunter was basically still at 0.
Exactly. That's the metric. Rhetoric over expected. That was the expected rhetoric. They took this guy in the 4th round and they think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they think every pick they have that was the expected for the Rams.
And he is going at 311. And so there certainly is a lot of fading of the short-term opportunity with him. I guess more than I feel comfortable with. Now, Ben, as we talk through these drafts and the tiers, one thing that is interesting to me is that I do think that you have, the best places to draft are in the top 5, fairly straightforward, in the first half of the 2nd round, and I think in the back half of the 3rd round. Because, the reason the back half or the front half of the 2nd round is so good is you essentially have a tier from the 107 to the 207, and you can really exploit that with those 2nd round picks that are equivalent to, say, a late 1st round pick. They're certainly not equivalent to an early 1st round pick. But then once you hit that, from about 208 to almost like 401, 402, you're dealing with, to my mind, a very flat area. And if you have a lot of 3rd round picks, it's not that you're going to be right. Obviously, a lot of these players will be misses, but we had a lot of fun taking Blue, Royals, Brashard Smith, and Pat Bryant. We debated Dylan Sampson, who was a faller. That would have been an interesting name. Jarquez Hunter actually went at the 306 in ours, which is a little bit earlier than usual. If he had fallen to us, we would have been excited about that. DJ Giddens went at 307. He's usually going at the back of the 3rd. That one is more of a handcuff play, and that was maybe the most crushing reality pick for me because I was hoping he would go earlier and into the situation that Blue finds himself in. Giddens was available when they picked Blue, so that part was pretty heartbreaking.
And seems even like as Giddens lands there, he's going at like 204. And so it's, because he does have that profile. So part of what I'm saying is,
it's going to be
maybe right. And so part of what I'm saying is, like, again, it gets back to this thing of like, well, drafters are selectively handling. I don't know. Maybe that's an argument that drafters are parsing more than just draft capital or situation or what have you. And they're also layering in the situational stuff, but it's just I guess a little bit surprising to me that Blue, with this opportunity in front of him, continues to be the price that he is. But I think it's an interesting thought experiment with a guy like Giddens landing there. Man, he would have went a lot higher, I think.
Would have been so exciting. So then the other kind of structural element that pops out to me in terms of how these rookie drafts are actually playing out is at tight end. And it kind of goes back to the landing spot conversation you were having and how that was going to then move through time and what we might see as the evolution of the trade value for these players and how if guys don't score well right away, then the negative parts of their profile start to play up. We have the problem with Tyler Warren, with the quarterback play. If he doesn't score well early, a lot of it, obviously, people are going to understand is on the QB, but suddenly you're going to be looking at the fact that this magical season he had took place very late in his collegiate career. We look at Colston Loveland, and if the extreme target competition there gets him off to a slow start, then suddenly we're looking at the fact that his profile is based more on per play success as opposed to really being able to put up the types of numbers that, say, Warren or certainly Harold Fannin did. And you look at them and how they might move through time, and you compare it to this group of 4 tight ends who go in round 3. And one of the things that is kind of fun about this year's draft is that you get that back half of round 3 that has so much value at the running back position, in part because the front half of round 3 is basically the tight ends. right?
Yeah.
And the tight ends there are interesting because they were drafted pretty aggressively in reality, and they do each have individual parts of their profile that you could point to. With Fannin, obviously, you have the immense production at a young age, including against elite teams. For Terrence Ferguson, you have this interesting path through college where there's actually quite a bit of production, and then he's a freak athlete. It was interesting, I thought, in kind of reading back through that when they were doing a feature on the Jaguars GM and how they were drafting, that when the Rams were on the clock for that pick, they asked him, who are the Rams going to pick? And he's just like, oh, Terrence Ferguson. And then they did. With Arroyo, you again have this sort of 1 year element, but you have production and you have potentially extreme athleticism. And then with Mason Taylor, you have the very early pick there as well. He's the one going earliest of that quartet, probably the least interesting to me, although I have picked him when he fell into round 3. He's going, when he fell into round 4, he's going as the 301.
Which I don't really get. That seems a little odd to me. I mean, I understand that the draft capital is there too, but again, are we not doing any situational landing spot stuff? We know that Justin Fields is not good for receiving volume. And so how long term of a play are you going to be making there at the tight end position? Because Fields is a starter here in year 1. You do have Garrett Wilson there as well. It's not like they don't have other receiving weapons. Now, Taylor could immediately become the second receiving weapon, or, I mean, obviously Breece Hall and the running backs are going to be involved in the pass game, but be right there with those guys. There's not really significant alternatives outside of Garrett Wilson, but it just, I mean, on a team that has a quarterback that takes that many sacks and also scrambles as much as he does, it is a little tricky for me to visualize how the production early in the career is enough to justify the draft capital of that spot. I mean, just because he went higher than Harold Fannin or Terrence Ferguson or those guys, it's like we don't have to draft it in the same order as draft capital, right? We don't literally have to. How are these guys going to be valued a year from now? Is a big way of thinking about it. And it's hard for me to envision a scenario where just because Mason Taylor had more draft capital by a half a round than Terrence Ferguson, that he's going to have enough of a receiving profile in year 1, unless he's a clear talent hit and Ferguson's a clear miss in some way. I don't know. Ferguson's got a lot of wide receiver competition and all of that stuff as well. So who knows, but seems like an interesting risk-reward gamble that high, in my opinion, when you know what the quarterback situation there is. The backup's Tyrod Taylor, is it not? I mean,
I think that again, for me, you have to take all of those running backs ahead of Mason Taylor.
Yeah.
So that actually moves him down a full round. These other 3 guys, based on the different types of bets you have to make, when Warren and Loveland are going. Now, granted, they're going after that tier break at the 105, right? So people are not generally, now I have seen them occasionally go there, but generally they're not being elevated into that top 5 group. We talked about how, 106, 107, what have you, all the way down to mid 2 is a tier. But those guys don't fall into that second group. I mean, it's a tier in terms of value. It's not necessarily a tier in terms of where guys are going. We're very consistently seeing players like Burden and Higgins, Tootin, Scadaboo in the second round portion. The tight ends are always in that first round group. Maybe this is just hoping because it would play into my 2025 plan very nicely. And then you and I didn't have a pick in that range. And so it's kind of interesting now. We do feel like we have a very powerful team, and we have Brock Bowers at the top of that tight end group. You hope that he can just play these next 10 years without missing a game. We're not as well backed up at that position as others. We have Freiermuth. It doesn't seem like that's going to ever take off with what the Steelers are doing offensively and how they want to build. They don't have a QB. They've got DK Metcalf. They drafted Caleb Johnson. They want to run the ball. I would have loved to have been able to add Fannin or Ferguson here for us. That's maybe my only, not really regret, but if we could have even more in addition to having had the chance to make 9 picks in the first 3 rounds. I would also like to make one of those tight end picks.
Yeah, those two are the ones that I think are the clear fun ones to go get, because I don't really like the Arroyo play either, in part because I think the Seahawks are going to do a lot of 2 tight end stuff like the Saints kind of did last year under Clint Kubiak, and based on the personnel decisions they've made. And you don't love, even if he winds up being the number 1 tight end, you don't love the situations where there are 2 tight ends for consolidating that can run routes. Because then the reason you do that is it's a scheme mismatch. One guy can stay in, the other one goes out, whatever. You can change the different looks. They got AJ Barner in the 4th round last year, and he had a good rookie season. He was like an effective second tight end. I mentioned Jacob Sanderson a little bit ago. I was talking with him a little, and he was talking about telling me about the different tight end positions. I'm not as up on this, but the F tight end and the Y tight end or whatever. But based on what he was telling me, Arroyo kind of fits more into the Fant mold, and Barner kind of does the other thing. He would be like the Foster Moreau of the Clint Kubiak. I'm saying based on what I remember him telling me. So don't hold this against Jacob if I have this wrong. But I believe this is what he was telling me, was that Barner would be sort of the Moreau and be that number 2 tight end in the 2 tight end sets. And Arroyo looks like maybe the more longer term answer for Fant, who probably isn't going to be on the team forever. Anyway, however that works out, however the 2 tight end sets work out, however all that goes, I do think Barner's a viable NFL player, and you already have Fant there, and like you're not talking about having a little bit of a tight end logjam. They obviously like Arroyo. They took him 50th overall. I don't think he's a bad pick or anything, but again, each situation is different. The landing spot stuff does matter. Early opportunity does matter. How these guys are going to utilize players within their scheme matters for fantasy. If I could wrap up the whole point that I'm trying to make about draft capital, Shawn, it's this idea that draft analysts or fantasy analysts are willing to contextualize everything. They want to contextualize stats. They want to contextualize when it comes time to fantasy, like redraft season. We want to parse all the little bits of the profile and do our rankings and have strong opinions on everything, strong opinions during waivers and all that stuff. But for some reason, this time of year, it feels like this idea that going in an order different than draft capital order is like blasphemy. That somehow, even though we know that you go look at any past draft and sort by position and look at the order of the different positions and they were drafted in, they're not. The NFL is not infallible. Yes, draft capital in the aggregate is a very important element, and it is mostly important. It's been theorized because it's the team deciding who gets to use them that is picking them, and so you're talking about just being handed early opportunity. And also the fact that really good players are going to be scouted high more generally than not, and they're going to go high more generally than not. But we also know that there's a crapshoot element to the NFL draft. And so if it's all just about early opportunity when there's these small changes, and Mason Taylor went 42, Terrence Ferguson went 46, Arroyo went 50. Those guys went 8 picks apart in the second round. And then Fannin went 67, one of the very first picks of the third round. He's only 25 picks behind Taylor. All 4 of these guys within 25 picks. But I have not seen Fannin go ahead of Taylor or Arroyo. I only have a few leagues. But people do not want to take Fannin ahead of those guys, despite the fact that I think, A, he's got a better situation for pass volume and to get into routes early because he's not a good blocker. That's what he does. He's a receiving tight end who got pretty good capital still. And B, I don't like the landing spot for Taylor or Arroyo. Well, and then I guess C, the fact that Fannin was a massively productive tight end in college. He's got all this production behind him. The profile is a guy who can receive. Anyway, I would have a hard time taking Mason Taylor or Elijah Arroyo over Harold Fannin when I think about the whole sort of range of outcomes. Fannin's young. If Fannin hits, how does he hit? He hits in a really meaningful way. Maybe he can hit. He's a unique prospect. A lot of people are saying guys like him have never produced because he's unique, and there's always unique prospects. It's still like you want to bet on. We're looking for outliers. We talk about this all the time. We want to bet on unique prospects. Anyway, I just think we should be willing to parse this stuff and contextualize it more than the market seems to want to. They seem to think we have to follow certain rules because of past mistakes. And I don't even know that our past draft mistakes or dynasty valuation mistakes can be adequately brought down to one element that we can put in a nice little box. It's like, oh, the problem here was we overdrafted a guy that was all hype. Like, oh, the reason Sky Moore was wrong was this. And it's, I mean, there's just going to be misses sometimes. Like, every process has some misses in the fantasy space, and there's going to be hits on guys that weren't productive. You know, I was talking to you before the show. It seems like the Terry McLaurin and Michael Thomas hits, these guys that didn't have great production profiles at wide receiver in college, have spawned like 10 years of people saying, well, we have to trust draft capital on guys like, you know, Matthew Golden and those types. And what about all the ones that people said, no, he's an overdrafted first rounder that continued to bust? Like Jahan Dotson was an example of this. The year he went in the first round, people in dynasty drafts were like, he has to go with the 1-2 turn. You can't let him fall any further. He got first round draft capital, but most observers were like, his production profile was not a first round wide receiver profile. And you can let him slip if you want to. Or some observers were saying that regardless, he wound up not being very good. Like that's, we just don't remember that player though, because we want to just criticize, you only think about production. What about Laviska Shenault? Like you guys were really high on Laviska Shenault. Anyway, there's no consistency.
It kind of
there's
goes
no
back
consistency.
to this conversation with the Chiefs and the Bills last year, where the Bills had a chance to take Xavier Worthy. Instead, they trade back and they take Keon Coleman. And as soon as they make that pick, then there is a school of thought that makes Worthy and Coleman essentially equivalent, because the team that could have taken either one of them didn't take Worthy and took another wide receiver in the same range, ignoring the fact that one of the reasons it was criticized a bit at the beginning is that you traded out of the spot where you could have taken a productive, freakishly athletic player and instead took a far less productive player. You know, we got the lesson just last year, and you have the problem that the Panthers had where they take Xavier Legette and then immediately have to come back and use a top 10 pick again at wide receiver because they've made the mistake twice with Mingo and with Legette, and they've got to address it for the third time. Now, to their credit, they have basically admitted those mistakes and continued to address it, and they are trying to surround Bryce Young with the talent that he needs. But those mistakes are not just mistakes for, obviously, fantasy managers, but they're mistakes for reality teams that leave you continuing to chase. And so
why is the expectation
you have to look at the profile?
There should never be a mistake. Why is the expectation that the NFL teams should by at this point should know what type of stuff to look for that will increase their hit rate, in my opinion. But why is the expectation that you should have 100% hit rate even if you're looking at the right type of stuff? Like sometimes you're gonna have misses. I don't know. I've done the golf analogy so many times, but like when I shank a drive, biggest thing I've learned about golf, if I want to play good golf, is when I hit a bad drive, I can't try to change my whole freaking swing on the course, or it's gonna go. I'm just stopping myself from saying swear words because we're not an explicit, but it's gonna go bad. It's gonna go off the rails for me, and so you have to just be like, all right, I'm gonna stick to the way that I'm playing my particular swing thought or whatever, despite the fact that, I mean, it's that quote from The Big Lebowski, like, say what you will about National Socialism, at least it's an ethos. Like, what? Because there's one miss somewhere, we just have to trust draft capital as an ordinal list, and that's the only thing we can do in rookie drafts? What are we doing? With everything else that we do, we actually like have strong opinions about. It just drives me insane.
But I do want to note, it is interesting, I think, that over the last 24 hours, as we've gotten more drafts filtering through that third round area, Mason Taylor has hung in. The rest of the tight ends are falling a little bit, and Fannin has moved ahead of Ferguson as the second from that four-player group, which is interesting. I haven't gotten much of him. And so, again, one of the reasons I updated the rankings this week was to try and really reflect in the rankings what I'm actually doing in drafts, because I think that drafts have a way of really clarifying what you truly believe. And yet, I mean, Ferguson is the one guy I wish I had a lot more of. I think he's a very strong pick around the 208, that I haven't gotten much of him as his ADP is in that 305, 306 range is unfortunate. Partly I haven't gotten a lot because I'm taking Fannin, and do think that Fannin is going to be good. I mean, you talk about a unique player, but I don't think it's much of a stretch at all to see him as a Jordan Reed, Evan Ingram, Jonnu Smith type of guy. One of the notes I would have again on him, and certainly not trying to move his ADP up any, we'd love for him to stay very inexpensive, but you mentioned the Rams not going to the combine and doing some of these other things. Some of the other things, as I understand it, are putting a little more emphasis on some of the tracking elements that they have for players in a lot of these off-season workouts. And I know that one of the concerns that people have around Fannin is the supposed lack of athleticism, and yet the Senior Bowl tracking showed him as gapped from the tight end group athletically, gapped up. And so, again, the Rams themselves didn't take him. They took Ferguson, who very clearly is a star athlete. But I think that is interesting as we look at Fannin and think about what someone with his collegiate production is likely to be at the NFL level.
Yeah, that's super fun. The Jordan Reed note there is, I mean, that's exactly, I think if you're a fan, that's exactly the upside case that you're envisioning, and the usage and the ways that he was productive at the NFL level. And Jordan Reed, a pretty unique type of tight end. I mean, there's been a lot of, oh, he's just a receiving tight end and this and that over the years, and they don't always pan out. And so it's another one where people are like, well, I'm just not going to listen to that. That can't work. Well, it did. Jordan Reed was the overall tight end one in points per game, I think back-to-back seasons, if I remember correctly, in his heyday before the concussions really started to hit. And also, I mean, go back to Jimmy Graham with the Saints is another, I guess, example of the same thing where these guys weren't very good blockers. They were basically just big wide receivers for a stretch. Maybe that doesn't matter as much in today's NFL or doesn't work as well or what have you. I mean, there's other counterpoints that you can make, but just because we haven't had that type of a player for a handful of years come up and be this new unique type of player doesn't mean that player can exist. Again, like every player is a little bit unique. They drafted him in the high third. As far as what you were looking for with Fannin, because he is a unique prospect and a unique player coming out of Bowling Green and all that stuff, the draft capital was strong enough that you should, in my opinion, should have been buying in immediately. Like, this is the bet that I want to make now. There's a team that buys into the bet, that they see what we see in, the fantasy community or the analytics or whatever, looking at the production community. This guy caught 117 balls or whatever it was, and was their whole offense against Penn State and Texas A&M and almost upset those teams basically single-handedly with Bowling Green around him. And everyone's like, wow, he played for Bowling Green. Well, I mean, it matters that they lost by one score to a team that was in the college football playoff and he had like 180 yards in that game. Does that not matter? I mean, obviously that matters.
But how much are you, I say, worried, discounting, what have you, this element for the Browns, where you and I think are on a slightly different page, where I think that Dylan Gabriel has a real chance to be kind of their guy. One of the, it isn't even interesting, but one of the weird things as it relates to this idea of ignoring draft capital or not is that Gabriel goes ahead of Sanders, and Sanders is going 2 rounds ahead of him in rookie drafts.
Sanders,
I get the impression that you
insane. I told you, I think the only thing that makes sense for Sanders' price is that people are doing the same thing I did to you the first time we talked about him. And I said to you, is there some possible latent athleticism here that isn't showing up in the numbers? Because you're like, he's not really a scrambler. And I'm like, yeah, but he's Deion Sanders' kid. And I think fantasy drafters are like, well, he's definitely a dual threat. And so they're just drafting him like there's this dual threat, like the Milroe play. Yeah, he may not start right away, but when he does start, he's going to have this scoring profile that, as you explained to me and has become clear from every analyst that's talked about Shedeur Sanders, that's not Shedeur Sanders. He's not Deion Sanders. He does not run a 4.2. But I think drafters think that he does.
Yeah, well, we'll see there. I mean, do you think that Joe Flacco plays enough to start this season that we actually just get Fannin off to a hot start?
I do. I think Flacco's playing like half the season. I I think they brought him back because he was really good for them down the stretch in 2023, and they let him go last offseason, and it last year went poorly. I do think we'll see the rookies play. We are a little bit on a different page on Dylan Gabriel. I was joking with you that I just think he's too small. I mean, he's not a big quarterback. And in college, you have the wider hashes and the wider splits, and not every offensive lineman is 6'7" necessarily, and all these things. I think it's easier to see some of the stuff that you need to be able to see in those offenses that are a little bit more spread out. I at this point believe that like Kyler Murray can't see over the line consistently enough, and you're not going to get, at least Kyler Murray has the athleticism that he does, right? That you're not going to get Dylan Gabriel the best of his traits, because I think what he is he's a touch passer, he's an anticipatory passer. You're not going to be able to get that at the NFL level because he's just not tall enough. Like, I just think it's that simple, but maybe I'm going to miss the boat on that because everything else seems to be there. The accuracy and the anticipation, all those are the traits that normally I'm like, I love that in a quarterback, and the production that goes with it. This guy's a winner. He can throw with anticipation. He can throw accurately. He can pick the right spot to put the ball to. And then when he physically does it, deliver it to the right spot. So both the mental and the physical side of that consistently enough that he can win all these games at all these different programs. He played at 3 different programs. It's a really exciting profile from that perspective. I just think he's too small. Like, I don't think he can do it. Obviously, the Browns disagree. They think he was worth bringing in. I guess I would probably still take Sanders over him, even though Sanders went later, just because he's 2 inches taller than him, and he's not tall enough, right? But I also think the Sanders pick makes the Gabriel thesis trickier, where you're thinking maybe Gabriel starts week 1, and I do see that as a possibility. Anything's on the table for the Browns. A bunch of people were talking about, the Browns have too many quarterbacks now. No, they don't. Deshaun Watson's not playing for the Browns. It's just not happening. We've talked about this a bunch. They've signaled that. He tore his ACL or his Achilles again. He had a second Achilles tear in like December after he was rehabbing the first. And people are acting like he's going to be back and complicate matters. They're not going to bring him back at this point. And I just think that's my guess. But I think Flacco probably starts. You think maybe Gabriel starts, and that they do like Gabriel more. I think that's clear. But I think if Flacco is sort of the plan to start, that it's not certain that Gabriel is then the one who takes over. I think it's likely, but that there's a possibility that Sanders plays his way into that, basically. It'll be really interesting to see the whole offseason there, but I do think, like, in some of the ways that you talked about Dylan Sampson as a little bit of a hit on Quinshon Judkins at the running back position for that team, I felt like the Sanders pick hurt a thesis I already didn't really believe because of the height issue with Dylan Gabriel. I still think Gabriel's. I just said I'd take Sanders over Gabriel. Maybe I wouldn't actually stand by that. I still think Gabriel's an intriguing one to chew on, but yeah, it's just tricky. I don't want to play either of them, is what it comes to.
It's interesting with the Browns. So I think they took 2 swings, but the wrong types of swings. I think the play that I actually like a little better, that, certainly from a fantasy perspective, doesn't get really any coverage because it's such a long shot, but Riley Leonard being this kind of mismatch of Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. I mean, that to me is more interesting in part because Leonard has interesting traits. And that's the reason that Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson are in the NFL, is they have interesting traits. And unlike those guys where we have watched them fail, Leonard, even though a long shot, we don't conclusively have the information that he is a failed NFL quarterback. You contrast Gabriel with Sanders, and you have one guy who is going to learn the offense, run the offense, show the pinpoint accuracy, show the great touch, but not have the arm strength and not be able to actually do it in games as opposed to practices because you don't have the height, as you're talking about. And then you have the player who does have the height, and is fairly accurate, but otherwise there's really nothing to his profile, including the preparation aspects that you would need to be a good NFL quarterback if you don't have elite talent. And so you'd have 2 different profiles that basically don't work. Maybe Joe Flacco has a long-term situation here that he can really make work with the Browns. Ben, this draft is so deep at running back that you and I actually had a debate at the 411 because Ollie Gordon and Taj Brooks were still there. Kind of as we wrap this up, I'm pretty excited about Gordon. I think that the 2023 results are a little closer to who he is than the 2024 results, even though I definitely don't think you can ignore those. I think the situation there with Miami is exciting. To have him fall to the 411, I mean, I think that's a very rosterable player in both seasonal leagues. I mean, I think he's going to make an interesting FFPC main event pick at the end of drafts. And then Brooks with the situation that you'll talk about in a moment. And again, Brooks put up a fantastic agility score, gives me these muscle hamster vibes. When we talk about the depth of the class, it doesn't just stop with the guys in that Brashard Smith, Devin Neal, Dylan Sampson type of range. It just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah, and it's funny. We did debate this and we went with Gordon, and then we ended up trading up in the 5th round and taking Brooks as well. I wasn't like, well, I don't know that we were necessarily debating it. I just brought up Brooks. I wasn't necessarily like pounding the table for him or pushing for him heavily. I think the more that I looked at their individual profiles, the more I understood your position. Because one of the things I told you as we discussed it is I really did like Ollie Gordon from the very beginning, from the first read through of your rookie guide. I got pretty stoked about him, and I was like, oh, this is the like Chuba Hubbard of this class, because you talked through how good they were, or he was in 2023. And one of the things you said to me in our text conversations on this pick was, it's exciting to think about like how high we would have been on Ollie Gordon if he would have been able to go pro after 2023, basically, and landed on the Dolphins after that 2023 Dolphins season where their running attack looked like anyone could score 1 million points in it. And you'd be like, oh my God, Ollie Gordon in that offense would just be absurd. But then he had the tough 2024, which you wrote up, I remember, as everything sort of falling apart around him. They went like 4-8 or whatever it was. And that makes it tough on a running back at the college level. The year prior, he was 7th in the Heisman. I mean, he had a ton of production. It wasn't just like a good year. He was
including receiving production.
Yeah, massive amounts of total yards and TDs and all that. I don't have it pulled up, but a very interesting player. And then obviously, yeah, the Dolphins situation struggled in 2024 as well. So it doesn't sound as fun to me in my head for 2025, but I like the way you put that as far as how confident are we that the 2024 version of either of these, the player or the situation, are as bad as it looked in 2024? And probably, and in most cases, I'm not confident of that type of thing. Probably we should expect it to swing back a little when 2023 was so much better in both situations. So he's a fun one. I totally see that. Brooks, I was so excited about because I like the situation more, I think. Samaje Perine turns 30 this year. Couldn't get on the field with the Chiefs last year when they needed him to. Couldn't really stay on the field with Denver 2 years ago. And then they cut him in the preseason last year. So he's bounced around a little bit already. Cincinnati brings him back. He's probably an issue for Taj Brooks early in the year, especially. But one of the things that I saw from somebody in the Cincinnati sphere or something after the draft was like, or maybe during the draft, was a tweet that was basically like, I like that Taj Brooks pick. Like, tie him to the hip of Samaje Perine in camp. I can't remember where I saw this, but I liked that thought that it was like, okay, here's this bigger back who caught 25 plus balls each of the last 3 years. Now the per route, like yards per route and run and stuff is not very good, but he did catch some passes, and that agility that you noted translates to the pass game stuff, at least to some degree, or I think it would. He's got a little bit of size and agility and caught some balls. So I think that's a little bit intriguing when you consider that like the other alternatives are Samaje Perine at age 30 and Zach Moss, who last year it was all talking about career ending. He's probably going to be back and maybe a concern. But the fact that the Bengals like Zach Moss tells you a little bit about what they see maybe in Taj Brooks as well, because Zach Moss is not that different. He's a bigger back with a little bit of agility, but doesn't really scream explosiveness or those types of things, which is sort of the concern with Taj Brooks, is there's not a massive amount of explosiveness or anything, but he did have over 1,500 rushing yards the last couple of years, 10 plus touchdowns both years, caught some passes. The missed tackles, force per touch stuff, the evasion rate stuff isn't great. The yards after contact stuff isn't great. There's a possibility he just isn't very good. For me, it's mostly just that he has size, agility, some ability to play on 3 downs, And I do think that the Bengals may just be like grooming him or viewing him as the person who could be groomed to be the new Samaje Perine, which again, you're talking about a big back with like the agility, right? Like that's what I think of with Samaje Perine as well. And maybe what they were looking for in Zach Moss. And then I think what they were looking for in Taj Brooks. So to me, it's a lot more about little elements of his profile, but there are concerns about his profile. And then the fit, a lot more about the fit and the situation that like, this is a Bengals team that had Chase Brown go off last year. He's going to be their lead back again this year. They didn't want to spend capital at the position, but this is the guy they did eventually draft when they made the pick. That everyone was kind of anticipating a running back pick coming on day 3 for these guys. This is who they brought in. They like him, and they probably view him in these ways where, second half of the season, assuming Moss isn't particularly healthy, he's ahead of Perine, I think, at that point, and spelling Chase Brown, playing some on pass downs, and maybe with the size, getting some goal line work. I think it's interesting, especially like in a best ball context, if you have any best ball dynasty leagues, because I think there's a possibility for, again, a Perine I like in that type of a situation where those pass catching backs, we think about them as like, oh, they're PPR floor guys that catch some passes. They actually are more volatile. Mike Beers showed this at RotoViz years ago, but they're great best ball picks when they have the pass catching only profiles because they tend to spike their receptions together. I remember like back then it was like Shane Vereen, and there's this one year where Shane Vereen had 3 games where he had 8 catches in all 3 games. And then like a lot of other games where he had 2 or fewer, and he doesn't score any points in those games, but when he catches 8 balls, he's hitting your PPR lineup in best ball. So you don't know when the game script is going to put a team in a situation where they might throw to their pass down back 6 or 8 times. But in best ball context, those types of players can, especially if they have a little bit of size and maybe can get a rushing TD at the goal line, catch 6 balls and a rushing TD, and you have a nice day with the yardage that comes along with all that stuff. So he's a profile that I think could have the high value touch stuff, at least cut into the high value touch stuff a little bit and be interesting.
Yeah, you've got a big back who catches passes and changes direction really well. That sets you up very nicely for fantasy. He's again someone where I just think almost any other draft, people will be looking at him in a very different light and would be drawn to the things you just mentioned, where it's a solid profile. I had him at the 311 pre-draft, and then the situation is actually sneaky really good. And you think about that within the context of, say, DJ Giddens, when we discussed a little bit earlier, and we really like. I mean, I love Chase Brown. I do think he's going to score a ton of points. At the same time, I mean, Chase Brown is probably not Jonathan Taylor. I mean, there have been times over the last several years that Taylor just didn't look right, and Chase Brown's probably better than that version of Jonathan Taylor. Taylor was hot down the stretch, did look like himself again, looks like he's probably going to be a star in 2025. DJ Giddens not going to get a ton of work if Taylor stays healthy. Brooks, in part because of those high-value touches that you mentioned, he could actually be a player who has not enough to be excited about it, but you think about injuries that happen, you think about buys that come through. This is a player who could have standalone value. And then, I mean, sadly, players get hurt. I mean, if Chase Brown got hurt, you're looking at Taj Brooks potentially scoring a lot of points.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. He's like a pretty clear handcuff in that regard. Even if Moss is healthy and there and all of that, you would think that the younger version of Zach Moss would beat out the Zach Moss coming off a career-threatening neck injury where maybe he wasn't able to rehab as strongly as he could all offseason. I mean, that's one of the big things about Moss is still there, but I'm not trying to be completely out on the guy, but even if he's all the way back and he does play, first of all, there's the potential for re-injury and those things, but there's also the element of like he hasn't played now for like a full year at an advanced age where you don't know if he's still as sharp physically, and he didn't have a lot of athleticism to lose. And sometimes these guys who do make it back, then it becomes clear that they're just maybe not the player that they were. I mean, I think that's kind of how it ended for Chris Carson, if I remember correctly. He had kind of a neck thing, missed a lot of time, came back, did try to play a little bit, and it was just like, well, he's just kind of not the same dude. Or maybe the neck injury just put his career on ice. I can't remember exactly, but it's tough to come back from the stuff that Moss has had to deal with here, and you know, you hope the best for him, but it does seem like, to your point, if something were to happen to to Chase Brown that Taj Brooks doesn't have competition there at this point. There's not. I mean, that's one of the huge things. Is I was trying to emphasize. You look at the rest of that depth chart. They have like Gary Brightwell down the depth chart. Like, he was not good with the Giants. Like, these are below replacement level backs. 30-year-old Samaje Perine's a below replacement level back. Zach Moss, coming off a neck injury, is a below replacement level back probably. Well, suddenly Taj Brooks, even though he's a sixth rounder who doesn't have that great of a profile, looks like, from a talent perspective, yes, he's a rookie. Maybe it'll take some time to get there, but just because he's young and has juice in his legs is going to probably be, it's a lot like the Jaden Blue thing. It's going to look different than the guys that he's taking reps next to in camp. Again, you noted it. The agility scores were really, really strong. Very, very good for a bigger back. And that's going to show up in drills.
And SIS had him for very strong evasion in 2023. Now, it's pretty disappointing that doesn't carry over to 2024. I mean, you'd really like him to be coming off of a season where, as a college player, he made a lot of guys miss. But yeah, I think there's talent there. And maybe this is even beyond the scope of what we're looking at here. Maybe it just fits into something that I am probably going to be wrong about. But the Bengals offense is one to attack at the running back position, as contrasted to like the Steelers, where I think the perception of the Steelers is that these guys are going to score, but it's not as many points as people think. And it's almost certainly going to be broken up in a way that doesn't really give you an impact fantasy player. And I don't know that we're necessarily going to get that from the Bengals either. Certainly in the first half of the year, last year, you don't. But when you had Joe Mixon, even as a player who had terrible fantasy points over expected numbers for years, he would score points with the Cincinnati Bengals. You expect the guy who's there with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those guys moving the ball. They're going to be down by the goal line constantly. If you're playing against the Bengals back, like on Monday Night Football, you're terrified that the back's going to score 4 touchdowns and beat you from, a huge margin. Once Moss went out last year, we got that from Chase Brown, where the running back scored a ton of points. The path to Brooks scoring a ton of points is obviously much, much narrower. But my point would be that even if he is not a legitimate starter, if he's getting the bulk of the carries, he probably scores, again, better than it seems like. I really like Cincinnati for the reasons. I mean, not just that his landing spot there and his opportunity is good, but I like the Bengals part on top of that. I'm glad we got both of those guys. As soon as we made the Gordon pick, I put a trade out there to try and move up in round 5 to get Brooks. And it's fun to have them both, even though, again, we do have some total roster spot issues that we'll have to address as the offseason moves along.
The first year that we did this, longtime listeners will remember, I had such a hard time understanding it, but I'm a seasoned vet of the Siegele tactics now, where we have like 28 players right now on a roster that we have to cut down to 20 before week 1. And so it feels like a lot, but in the past, it hasn't actually been, I mean, typically speaking, 5 or 6 of the cuts wind up being somewhat straightforward. And then it's like the last few are kind of tough, and we'll figure that out as we get there. But you give yourself a lot of angles to consider all off season, and that's fun. Some of the guys really gain a lot of value just between now and week 1 because their situations look so good. It's so fun to think about how that stuff's going to evolve. I want to say that, I've made a bunch of big, bold comments today, I guess, about the ways that we're analyzing and the different multifaceted elements of these profiles and those things. And everybody's just drafting on draft capital and all of that. I guess a big reason for that, Shawn, is reading your stuff and seeing that your ranks deviate pretty significantly from that. And then seeing that, some of the people that I think in the past gave a lot of credit maybe to your ranks. I mean, everybody has their own ranks, their own guys, things that they like, but I feel a little bit like there's some people out there that are like, well, Siegele's ranks they're always a little out there, but this is exactly what you should be looking for from content. In my opinion, you should be looking for somebody who has a really strong evidence-based opinion on every single player, breaks it down, gives you the reasons to either trust or not trust his opinion, and then also gives you the ability to then play the ADP and the differences that the market is not necessarily following every one of those little things. So if you're not yet subscribed to the RotoViz, well, to RotoViz generally, to the site, you need to do that. You can go read Shawn's. I mean, I mentioned he has multiple long and aggressive pieces, but the most recent one was a rookie ranking update. So the title is All the Subtle Changes from 50 Hours of FFPC Drafting and a Couple of Meaningful Moves. And you have his write-ups from before, and then in addition to that, his explanation of value changes, subtle value changes, and subtle moves that he references there in the title. And I mean, there's several thousands of words here about a lot of players that we didn't get a chance to get to today. We'll talk about them more obviously through the summer. I'm excited to let the people in on all of them. I should have done a better job of grilling you on some of the stuff that I thought was so good about this and having you share it on the show. But we'll get into that stuff more. I mean, I'm scrolling through now. There's so many, like the Matthew Golden thing we were talking about a little bit before the show, I think is really interesting. We could have talked through. We did hit on, a lot of the running backs and tight ends, the 2-3 turn, but we didn't. You getting a chance to talk more about Jalen Royals is something that needs to happen before too long. There's several things that we've discussed on our own that we didn't maybe get into this show, but we will talk about for anybody out there. And there's a bunch of players we didn't even reference, and I'm not referencing now, but go read Shawn's write-ups. Go read them. The ranking is going to be different than ADP. He lists the ADP, so you can see where there's significant differences. And he tried to get back in line somewhat with ADP, so it's a pretty good list of how you should play your rookie drafts. But even if you're not in Dynasty, I mean, this is a really good indication of where he thinks the market, at least in the Dynasty space, is misvaluing some of these rookie prospects, which may help you in your best ball, etc. Would help you in your best ball, etc. So can't recommend that enough.
Well, thank you. And it's certainly fun to draft with you and to talk about Dynasty. That'll do it for this very fun, at least for me, episode of Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. Make sure you're signed up to Stealing Signals. I mentioned that fantastic Harvey piece. There are so many others as well. It is bengretch.substack.com. We'd love to have you guys over at RotoViz. Coupon code there is RBRadio2025 at checkout for 10% off your one-year subscription. We do have Volume 3 of the Rookie Guide out as well, which carries us a coupon to the one-year sub. So again, you can kind of bundle those things and make them as inexpensive as possible. Then we still have one more pick. We didn't talk about Torrey Horton. We drafted him at the 603. Oh, we have 2 more picks. We're going to finish with 30 guys on our roster. We only have to get rid of 10 of them before the season starts. We love you guys. We'll talk to you again soon.